Probably a lot of you maybe have had a chance to hear me speak on behalf of ATB Financial, where I give my economic forecast and my economic chat about what's going on in the province. But this afternoon, actually, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I have a different presentation for you. It's not about the current economy, what's going on, but rather it's about a book that I co-authored back in February with my co-author Robert Roach from the Canada West Foundation, and we were very happy to launch the book, The Boiling Frog Dilemma, Saving Canada from Economic Decline. And it is a book about the economy, I guess, but it's sort of a bigger, longer-term view of the economy rather than what's happening in 2012 and 2013. And as realtors and as people working in the real estate industry, I hope that there will be lots of takeaways for you. The book obviously isn't written specifically for people in the real estate sector. It's written for all Canadians. And one of the impetuses, I guess, the impetus for the book is we hear a lot of times people ask about what does the economy need? What do we need to do to continue to thrive and prosper in Canada? And economists write dozens and dozens of books and reports about this all the time, and normally those books and reports sort of put it on the government. We need the government to come up with a policy, we need a better tax framework, or we need tax credits or these kinds of things. And we recognize that a sensible, robust tax policy and government public policy, absolutely that matters. But we don't want to just be another report giving some advice to governments. Rather, our book is a challenge to Canadians in every industry, including real estate. It's a challenge to say, are there maybe some bad habits we need to drop? Are there some new attitudes we need to develop? How is it we can, as Canadians, actually take control of our economy and not wait for the government to, give us a tax credit or something like that to make us imaginative or make us innovative? So as we go through the presentation this afternoon, I want you to think about yourself personally, or maybe your family, or maybe the people, your colleagues, or the companies and agencies that you work with, and think about what ideas you could possibly bring back, both for yourself and for those around you. Because ultimately, it really is going to be up to Canadians to say, we are going to take control of our own economy, and we are going to continue to prosper and thrive in the 21st century. So a lot of times people question what creates wealth in the economy, and we argue that it's not oil and gas molecules in the ground that create wealth. And by wealth, by the way, I don't just mean the GDP. I mean prosperity. The types of things that make Canada and make Alberta a fantastic place to live, the quality of life things. What is it that creates that kind of wealth and prosperity? It's not natural resources that create it. It's not another manufacturing facility in Oshawa that creates wealth. What creates wealth is what happens in this little piece of real estate right here. The power of a great idea, the power of creative ideas. Because increasingly, we need creative ideas to help solve some of the problems in our resource sector. I don't know if some of you have been aware of this, but the world is looking at Canada with increasingly critical eyes about maybe some of the ways we extract resources. And I think it's up to Canadians to put our creative powers to work to say, how is it we can extract these resources in a way that is maybe more environmentally acceptable to the rest of the world? We're not turning our back on resources. We're enormously blessed with resources. But we might need to put some brain power or some creative energy into how we can extract those resources. Or in central Canada, what is it? How can Canadians actually compete in the global value-added chain? Obviously, just keep going with the traditional mass manufacturing of the 1950s and 60s is not going to work anymore. We need to apply some creative energy to figure out what is it that Canada can produce, or maybe specifically where in the value-added chain in a very global economy can we best position ourselves. So it comes down to creativity, which is one of the main themes of the book. And we like to talk about this little invention right here. When commercial photography first started to take off around the 1860s, 1870s, the invention of the camera actually preceded that by many, many decades, but it wasn't really around commercially, not very commonly, until about the 1870s. And at the time, when you started to see more commercial photography, in London, England, at the Royal Academy of Art, there was a raging debate going on between some of the faculty there. Some of the faculty members, they were quite fearful in fact, angry of this camera innovation. They said, we have to stop this camera because if this camera nonsense takes off, it's going to throw artists out of work. And you could see maybe they had some reason to fear. This is sort of what painting, it was a style called realism. A lot of artists at the time made a fairly good living. Painting portraits of children or families, portraitures, for which they got paid very, very well by the royal classes or the nobility or the wealthy people. I'm not sure how much it would cost in today's adjusted dollars to have a portrait like this painted. Probably in the tens of thousands of dollars. Not very many people could afford it. But these artists made a really healthy living off of that. But you see what the snap of a shutter, what photography could do. So no wonder they were maybe a little bit fearful because the cameras could capture, in fact, a better replica at the snap of a shutter and at a fraction of the cost of what these painters would probably, what they would charge. So there was one group of thought at the Royal Academy of Art that said, this is something to be feared. We have to resist this. There was another group at the Royal Academy of Art that said, no, no, no. Don't worry a bit about this camera. It's a fad. This photography business will never take off. And the reason they thought that is they argued that photography in and of itself can never be an art form. It can never replace art because it's not an artistic expression. And they really did expect it just to kind of fizzle out as a novelty and go away. Well, of course, we know with 150 years on our side, we know now that both of those arguments sounded a little bit silly to our ears because, of course, painting and artistry did not go away in the 20th century at all. In fact, painting as an art form took whole new avenues of expression that those painters in the 1860s and 1870s never really would have thought possible. And in some ways, you can think about the advent of the camera as liberating for artists because they no longer needed to worry about realism. Realism as an art form went away to a large degree, but instead they took on whole new types of expression in the 20th century. Now, are there any art history majors in the room? A good art historian would be quick to point out there were a lot of things going on at the turn of the 20th century that led modern art into these very strange avenues. And some of you might say, I actually prefer the painting on the slide previously to these ones. Nonetheless, these are the contemporary art masters of the 20th century. And there were a lot of political and a lot of social things going on which helped contribute or help move art down these roads. But I still can't help but think, if it wasn't for the camera and for photography at the same time, if maybe the world of art would have stayed in that realism. In that respect, photography helped liberate artists. And of course, we know that photography in its own right did become a very important art form in the 20th century and even today. Probably in ways and expressions that those photographers back in the 1860s who were taking pictures of little children, they would have never thought possible as well. So the point of all of this is the depth of creativity possessed by the human spirit is limitless. And that's actually really, really good news for an economist and for someone who tracks the economy, because traditionally we think economists, classical economic textbooks talk about land, labor, capital. Those are the three factors of production that we learn about. But we have to add to that creativity. Sometimes we'll call it entrepreneurialism, sometimes innovation. And fortunately, the first three, land, labor, and capital, they're limited in every respect, at least in the short term. But creativity is not limited at all. And that's actually the best news of all. Quote I love, everyone is born creative. Everyone is given a box of crayons in kindergarten. Then when you hit puberty, they replace them with books on algebra, maybe economics. Being suddenly hit years later with the creative bug is just a wee voice telling you, I'd like my crayons back, please. Hugh MacLeod, he wrote this book, Ignore Everybody and 39 Other Keys to Creativity. I recommend the book. That's after you read my book, of course, but I recommend this book if you're interested in this whole idea of creativity. And I think another thing we've done maybe a bit wrong or a disservice today is a lot of companies have a creative department, but we tend to sequester them at the end of the hall You know, those are the crazy nuts that don't wear neckties and they play foosball all day and they're all kind of offbeat a little bit. That's the creative group. But it sort of implies that the rest of us aren't creative, and I think that's a real shame. Surveys they do of children and adults show that around grade 1, grade 2, 90% of children would self-identify as being creative. They say, yeah, I can draw anything, and they've got a wild imagination and they know it, and they use it. Well, one story that I really love is a little grade 1 girl was drawing a picture with her crayons, and her teacher came by and she said, what is it you're drawing? And she said, well, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said, well, no one knows what God looks like. To which the student replied, well, they will in a minute. She had a wonderful, creative, imaginative spirit about her. But sadly, by the time we reach high school and certainly into adulthood, only 10% of us, it completely reverses, only 10% of adults self-identify and saying, yeah, I'm creative. The other 90%, they somehow lose that spirit. They lose the sense of identifying themselves as creative. And I think that's such a travesty, because everyone is creative. We might not all be creative in art forms. We might not all be creative with crayons or with paint or photography, but we all possess the capacity to be creative. One of the ways we can exercise or maybe foster creativity, the OE, that stands for the Overseas Experience. This building here, by the way, technically it's not overseas, it's in Mexico City. This is the library at the National University in Mexico City. But I just love this building as an example of the type of art, architecture, and culture, a combination that you would see probably not commonly in Canada, but other places of the world. You will encounter these kinds of buildings or these sorts of expressions. The OE is in Canada, this idea that you would go and live abroad for a year or two. It hasn't really caught on. Probably most of you in this room, if not yourselves, you'd be able to identify, yeah, I know someone who went and lived abroad for a year. My neighbor did that, or you know, my daughter's 20-year-old daughter, she went and lived in Europe for a year. But most of us probably have not had the opportunity to go and live abroad a year. And it's probably because we haven't been encouraged or nudged to do it. Certain other countries, Australia and New Zealand particularly, in fact, that's where this OE phrase comes from, is our neighbors to the south. They talk about commonly, where are you going for your OE? Or when are you coming back from your OE? And the idea is that everyone would go and do this. And it doesn't need to cost a lot of money, but the idea is you would go and live and work abroad for a year, doing whatever. It's much easier to do this, by the way, when you're 20 or 25 than 46. But nonetheless, it's possible, and the people in Australia and New Zealand, young people, are encouraged to go and do this. Now, quite often when I talk about this OE, I get parents who come up to me afterwards, usually with high school or university-age kids, and they're like, oh, they're not going to want to come home if they go and live abroad, you know, and this causes some parents some real sorrow. To which I answer, you know, Canada is not a country a lot of people are fleeing from, especially right now. Although as we move into winter, I don't know, we might want to flee temporarily. But my guess is they will come back. Canada is brimming with opportunities right now for young people. The chance to go and live abroad, I think you'll come back with a greater appreciation for actually what we have here in Canada. And you might come back with somebody. That's sort of the best case scenario of all. Because of course we know that Canada has been enormously blessed by the immigrant experience in terms of enriching viewpoints, enriching our economy, enriching different ways of seeing the world. That's all about what creativity is. So the immigrant experience has been one thing. But for those of us who have lived and been born and lived our entire lives maybe in Canada, we also need to experience that too. Going to live abroad for a year, and we will argue 6 months to 2 years is just about the right window. A vacation, by the way, is one thing, and that's helpful. But a vacation, as you can understand, is different than when you go to live somewhere. And you need to deal with finding somewhere to live, and you need to deal with, you know, setting up a billing system for your TV and everything else that goes around living versus just a vacation. Vacations are fun. They are helpful. You do see other parts of the world, but they really are limiting in terms of how kind of steeped in the culture that you can become. So we argue that maybe in Canada we need to start talking a little bit more about the OE, maybe encouraging young people, maybe setting up programs
where young people actually can go and do this without breaking the bank. The Rotary Club, any Rotarians here? They have they have a fantastic exchange system, or a student exchange system with high school students, giving high school students a chance to go and live in a safe environment, but in a different culture, a different country. And I think Canada, our economy, and our collective creative spirit, I think, could benefit from that. Okay, moving on. Oh, one more quote about the OE. The surest way to spark imagination is to confront the perceptual system with people, places, and things it hasn't seen before. That's a very academic sort of quote. The bottom line is, if you want to be creative, you've got to get outside of your hometown. You got to see the world, and you have to allow images and places and things that maybe you're not used to seeing sort of infiltrate your mind. You don't even have to like them, but you have to expose yourself to different places, people, places, and things if you want to become an imaginative, creative person. Okay, another theme in the book, The Boiling Frog Dilemma, moving up the value-added chain. Now these ladies here, this picture was also taken from about the 1870s. They don't look like they're having very much fun, but the task they are engaged in is called picking oakum, and this is maybe one of the original value-added propositions. These ladies are collecting little bits of rope off the docks that have been cut off and left there. And they are manually sort of unweaving them all, or untangling them, and pulling out the little jute fibers and collecting those in those piles, and thereby creating oakum, which then can be used in other applications like mattresses or bedding or stuffing for things. So they're creating some value. They're adding value to something that had less value, and then in the process creating some value. In Alberta right now, and in fact in all of Canada, there's a lot of talk about we need to be creating more value. We want more value added, especially in our resources, right? We talk about this all the time. No one really likes the idea that we're just shipping all of our raw crude oil and our gas and our logs and everything else for upgrading and manufacturing elsewhere. And I think there are some real serious questions to be asked around that. But in our chapter on the value added, we ask people to consider, are we shooting high enough? So consider this, the lowly toilet brush. Unloved, underappreciated, no one really thinks too much about a toilet brush. This little toilet brush here, there's probably 30 cents worth of plastic and metal as inputs into making the brush. It is probably without question manufactured in China or another country that has low labor costs. It's shipped back to Canada, and you can go down to Walmart and buy this for $7.99. So from 30 cents to almost $8, there is some value added there. There's no question. That manufacturing stage adds value. But consider these toilet brushes. This is the Elise toilet brush, designed by French designer Philippe Starck. Also the same 30 cents worth of plastic and metal that go into these, also manufactured in China or somewhere else, and also shipped back to Canada. But you would go down and buy this toilet brush for $39.95. Now here's where I get a lot, especially a lot of the gentlemen in the room, they tend to roll their eyes and say, well, who on earth would pay $40 for a toilet brush? They're completely being duped. And other people are saying, I've got that toilet brush, or I'm going to go buy that toilet brush. The point is there is actual value added in this, and it is in the design and the aesthetics of the toilet brush. Now you can disagree with if that is the toilet brush you're going to buy or not, but there is some value added in the design process. So manufacturing, that secondary upgrading, does add value, there's no question. But oftentimes where we're really missing the mark is the design piece of it. And we feel that this is really where Canada is best situated, in the global value added chain. At the very top end, the designers, the engineers, the people that are creating or dreaming up these things. If it makes sense for them to be manufactured elsewhere, no government subsidy is going to stand in the way of that. They're going to be manufactured somewhere else anyway. But we have the opportunity in Canada, if we want to be creative and imaginative and innovative, to be the designers of the world. And this goes for our resources as well. There's a lot of talk, as I mentioned, about, we want our crude oil upgraded and refined here in Alberta. But if you think about that stage, that is really just secondary manufacturing. It's taking a raw product and turning it into a product. And yeah, we do a lot of that in Alberta. Maybe we should be doing it more. It's tough to kind of make the economic case right now to be doing it more. No one wants to build these refineries. But again, that's only the secondary stage of manufacturing. Maybe we need to be situating ourselves and concentrating on making Alberta and Canada the best place in the world for engineering new types of extraction techniques, or maybe alternative or renewable energies altogether. Maybe we need to be the brains of the world in helping others, showing others how to responsibly extract resources and refine them. All we're saying is let's not stop at only secondary manufacturing or upgrading. The other example I like to use in this is the iPod. I talk about the iPod a couple places in the book. The iPod, it's Apple, obviously an American company. It is manufactured in China. Probably assembly lines I couldn't even fathom of people snapping these things together. And there'd probably be a lot of people in America right now that are very angry about this, saying those jobs should be in Ohio or Indiana or somewhere else like that, and create manufacturing jobs, you know, in America. And that isn't such an unreasonable thing to say, actually. But if you consider the value of the iPod, only 2% of that value is in the manufacturing piece of it. Hardly any. It's a negligible amount that is actually flowing to those assembly lines in China. The manufacturing piece of it is not where the money is. 40% of the value of the iPod stays in America. It is in the engineering and the technology and the accounting and the marketing and the design of all of these things. That's really where you want to be. That's where the money is. If it makes more sense for someone else to snap it together, that's what should happen. If it makes sense that that plant be in Ohio, okay. If it makes sense it's in China, we shouldn't really be too upset about that. But the point is, that's not the end stage. Where the real money is, or where the real wealth, or the prosperity is in that design end of it. So in the value-added chain, we are encouraging Canadians, don't stop short by only thinking of secondary manufacturing and upgrading. Yes, if that makes sense, but let's put our energy at positioning Canada at the very top of the value-added chain. Okay, embracing failure. Some of you, although not all of you, look old enough to remember this product right here. This is New Coke. This was introduced by the Coca-Cola Company in 1985. And for those of you who are adults, you might remember what happened when Coke introduced its new formula. It just about brought down Western civilization. People were so upset. Consumers hated the new formula so badly, or the new recipe. They turned thumbs down, and this caused a real dilemma for the Coca-Cola Company. It was a marketing failure. Now, you probably also remember how the story ends. It was an opportunity to turn this into a marketing stroke of genius, because then Coke reintroduced Classic Coke, the original formula, along with New Coke, and at the same time Diet Coke. They had this little troika of colas at the time, and in 1985 Coca-Cola was actually gaining market share. So they were able to turn a marketing failure, which on the surface the new recipe was a failure, but they were able to turn it around and make a success out of it. Another pretty common consumer item that you might have sitting under your sink or maybe in the garage, WD-40. WD-40, it actually stands for Water Displacement 40th Formula. 40th formula. It was developed by an independent scientist guy kind of tinkering around in his basement in California in the 50s, and it's exactly what he was trying to get. He was trying to get a lubricant or something to stop squeaks and stop rust. And after the 39th, now this is where I'm embellishing the story, so this is not based in fact, it's based in my wild imagination, but you can almost hear his wife up in the kitchen yelling down the stairs, you know, Norm, give it up. You've tried this 39 times. It's not going to work. Come up for lunch, you know, or however long he's been down there. But thank goodness he didn't stop at 39 tries. He tried one more time, and by the 40th attempt, he got just the right formula. And now we have WD-40. I don't know if today we are as patient as a culture, maybe our business culture, I don't know what it is. I don't know if we're as patient anymore in embracing failure. Not wallowing in failure. We don't want to just sort of be mediocre and say, well, we're used to failing. But recognizing that failed attempts are the necessary stepping stones to getting to success. Now, it takes a lot of wisdom to decide, well, how many failed attempts, do we want to go? we don't have WD 10 million in 40, you know, it was 40 attempts. But it takes some wisdom in discerning that, but maybe we need to be a little bit more patient with failure as the process to success. Another example, aviation. Back in about 1909 when, if you pardon the pun, aviation was getting off the ground. The Wright brothers and a series of others in North Carolina and in the US, they were experimenting with this flight. And I don't know how many people were hurt or injured or maimed or killed in the attempts that were, the early attempts at flight. I can't help but think that a lot of people were. I wouldn't get in this contraption. But thank goodness they did. And I don't know if today, if aviation was in its early days, I think the government would clamp down on this so fast and say, that's the end of that. Someone is going to get hurt, and we can't have that. Now, obviously, I'm not encouraging activities where people are going to get hurt. I want to be clear about that. But I also think that maybe sometimes we've lost a little bit of the spirit of risk, taking more risks, embracing some failures because we know that they are going to eventually lead somewhere. And we're too quick to sort of shut things down and say, we tried it once, now give up. A little bit closer to home, the Leduc #1 oil derrick, 1947. This came after a series, years and years, of dry holes, attempts by the industry. They had discovered natural gas, but they thought there's got to be some oil. Now, they were not using, obviously, the same techniques and seismic technology we have today. It was trial and error. And they had hit so many dry holes in a row. I don't know, I wasn't alive in 1947. At the time, I don't know if there were people saying, you know, you should give this up. You're never going to find oil in Alberta. But they didn't. They kept trying. And by 1947, they did find oil, and they found it in great quantities. And of course, that has changed forever the course, the economic course of this province. Final example. Oh, I guess I don't have a final example. I was going to talk about carbon capture and storage. I thought I had a little image of it. Now, carbon capture and storage, if you follow it in the news, or you know, it's a little bit of a controversial topic. The provincial government, of course, has put about $2 billion in trying to sort of stimulate some research. If you just asked an engineer, a technologist, carbon capture and storage, where you're actually siphoning carbon off of the exhaust pipes of certain industries, and you're piping it back into the ground and you're storing it there, sequestering it there, keeping it there. The engineers and the technologists say, yeah, you can make that work, but you can't make it work economically. There's no price incentive right now to be doing it. So as a result, you have some voices that are saying this is a complete waste of time and money. Just stop this now before you waste 10 more cents on this crazy idea that you can store carbon economically. I don't know, I don't want to take a position, or I don't want to advocate one way or the other, but we throw this up as an example, CCS, as an example of maybe something that needs to be given some more life, maybe a generation or more of research. Maybe we can make this work economically. The early days of the oil sands back in the 60s and 70s, well, that didn't work economically either, not at all. There was no way, and probably some people were saying, you know, you're never going to economically boil crude oil out of frozen sand. It's just the economics don't work, so quit trying. Well, it's a good thing they didn't quit trying, because now, and then also with some increases in energy prices, now oil sands do work economically and is a main driver of the provincial economy. Okay, another theme in our book, collaboration. A person can have the greatest idea in the world, but if that person can't convince enough other people, it doesn't matter. Gregory Burns, who was quoted earlier on. I love this quote too, because it really gets to the message that ideas very rarely flourish in isolation. You can have a fantastic idea, but if you just keep that idea to yourself, or if you don't really rub that idea along with other people's ideas, it probably won't go anywhere. If you look at periods of human civilization where there's been these enormous level shifts in innovation and creativity and science, you think about the Italian Renaissance, late 1400s and early 1500s. It happened right at that period of time, not accidentally. What was happening at that period in time is the feudal system in Italy and Southern Europe was kind of breaking down a bit, and people were moving into the cities. They were becoming more urbanized for the first time in that region. They were moving to cities like Rome and Florence and Milan. And as a result, they were in closer proximity to each other that they never ever had before. Remember, there was no online in 1492 or any real practical form of communication. But when they were urbanizing, now we were rubbing elbows with each other. And scientists at the time found enormous benefit in exchanging ideas. You know, what are you working on in your workshop? And I'll tell you what I'm working on. And we'll find that by rubbing these ideas together, you know, it's greater than the sum of the two. And so there was these enormous periods of innovation and advancement in science and technology. The English Enlightenment, you know, a few hundred years later, same kind of thing. It was all happening in the pubs and coffee shops in England and in London at the time, where these philosophers and these writers and these great thinkers of our time, or I guess of that time, were getting together, and they were arguing and debating, and they were rubbing ideas together. And this is where you would get huge advances in thinking and philosophy. Today, well, in a lot of ways, we are more connected than ever. There's no question social media has helped that. And not for a second do I want to sound negative on the social media. Twitter is one of my favorite ways of sort of communicating with people. So social media has made us more connected, but I think you'd agree in a lot of other ways we are more disconnected than ever. You guys, I might be preaching to the converted here, because you guys are willing to take an hour or so of your day to come and be in collaboration with people and to listen to other ideas. So you guys probably get it. But I don't know if a lot of other Canadians do get it. I think a lot of other Canadians, they're just kind of happy, you know, slumping down in their basements and being in isolation. You know, they're on Twitter, but are they really in meaningful communication and collaboration? It's called community building. Some people definitely get it. The Rotary Club, I'll use them as an example again. They get it. They get the benefits of being together. Let's come together. Let's build something, you know. Let's put some money together. Let's exchange some ideas. I think maybe in Canada right now we need to, each individual person needs to identify, how am I in a community with people around me? How am I in collaboration? Do I have a really great idea? Am I keeping it to myself, or should I, you know, go down to Startup Calgary and talk with a few other entrepreneurs? Maybe they're working on something similar. It takes a little bit of risk to do that, but I think it's an important step. And if we miss out on this whole collaboration piece of it, I think the danger is our economy will get left behind. I do want to talk briefly, and then I will kind of wrap up here. Invention, innovation, and design. I want to talk about these three words particularly. I want to give you my sort of definition. There are other sort of definitions of them, but I want to give you my definition of them, and I want to identify why they are very different stages, and perhaps which of the three is the most forgotten, but probably the most valuable to the economy. First of all, invention. This is the process of creating something brand new, something like anything ever seen before. Of the three, this is without doubt the rarest. It doesn't really happen. Pure invention really doesn't happen very often. You think about the advent of electricity. Man didn't invent electricity, but they were able to harness electricity. Another little story I like, Michael Faraday, one of the scientists in the 1700s, again in England, when he was experimenting, he brought the faculty members together and showed them these experiments with electricity, and they were all stunned and amazed, you know, at what he could do. But some of the questions from the other faculty members were, well, you know, this electricity is all very interesting, but what is it good for? You know, they couldn't really see any practical application of it. And you have to give them some, you know, credit or cut them some slack. It's not like every household in London at the time had a refrigerator just waiting to be plugged in, you know. If we could only invent some electricity, we could plug this thing in. But sometimes the value of something might take years to kind of realize, what is this good for? But invention is pretty rare in its pure form. A little bit more common is innovation. That's described as the application of an existing technology or technologies, combining two things that already exist, in a new and very purposeful way. An innovation of the three words is probably the most overused word. Everyone wants to be innovative. Every government white paper wants an innovative education system, and every company's, you know, mission statement is, we are going to be the most innovative company around. And it's all great to aim for that, But innovation is not quite as rare as invention, but it is also fairly rare. It doesn't really come along all that often. I'm going to walk us through a few examples. But finally, design. This is sort of the poor cousin to the three, but probably the one that happens most frequently and one that has a tremendous amount of economic value and wealth. That's the improvement of an existing technology to create something more practical, something more useful, or more aesthetically pleasing. Think back to the toilet brush. Philippe Starck did not invent the toilet brush. He didn't even really innovate a toilet brush. What he did is he applied some fantastic aesthetic design to something that already exists, made it more visually pleasing. So here are a few examples of invention, innovation, and design. Electricity, I sort of walked us through that one. That would be something I would classify as pure invention. Recorded sound, the phonograph. Now, I don't know the stories around when Thomas Edison first was able to record sound and play it back, but I can't help but imagine, I like to imagine these situations. You know, here he is, he's able to do this. So he walks outside of his workshop and he calls someone in and says, hey, come in here, check this out. And he plays something back for them. I would imagine that person would be horrified. You know, what kind of deal with the devil did you make? Because all of us, we've all grown up all our lives with the notion that you can record something and play it back. But prior to Thomas Edison, this did not exist in any way at all. This was something brand new. And it changed the course of events for a lot of industries forever. Something else, vacuum tubes, that would be a pure invention. There was nothing else that really existed like that before. And of course, that set off the innovations around computing and data, digital technologies and digital information. It was all sort of made possible through the invention of the vacuum tubes and early computers. And then along comes something like this. Also, I guess you could classify this as a pure invention, the microprocessor, the microchip. This changed everything. It made possible all of this data information that we move around the world so quickly. How much computing power is in your cell phone? Every one of us has computing power in our pocket that would have blown away NASA scientists in the 1960s. It's just almost unfathomable, but it is because of the invention of this. And here we have an innovation combining digital information, the capacity to store information, along with recorded sound or recorded music, to the MP3 player of the 1990s. An innovation. It was very, very useful to be able to carry around in a small format all that kind of music with you as you went around. But consider this. Here's where the iPod comes back again. How many of us ever really had an MP3 player? They didn't really catch on in a big, big way. However, when Apple got a hold of it, they applied fantastic design. They did not invent the MP3 player. They didn't even really innovate. What they did is they took something that was already existing and applied fantastic design to it, made it aesthetically pleasing, but most of all, they made it really, really simple to use, and consumers snapped them up. We just can't get enough iPods. So 3 stages: invention, innovation, and design. But you see how a lot of the value added comes at that design end of it. Maybe not so commonly in innovation, and actually quite uncommonly in invention. A couple other examples. I don't know who invented the wheel. Maybe Fred Flintstone. I guess someone at some point must have figured out, hey, this is actually kind of useful. But someone at some point invented the wheel. This was something brand new, unlike anything seen before. And by the maybe 16th, 17th century, we get something like this, the horse-drawn carriage. Maybe an innovation, combining the power of a wheel with some other things, metal and different things that they were able to, that they had invented, combining it, innovating it in a way that was really useful. You just needed a horse. Then you get to something like this, the Model T. Now, Henry Ford did not invent the automobile. He really did innovate the assembly line. That was his major contribution. But when we tend to think about the early automobiles, we tend to think about the Model T. I would call this a real innovation. You're combining 2 existing technologies, the wheel, it's really the horse-drawn carriage, right? So you're combining the horse-drawn carriage with another technology that existed already, and that was the combustion engine. Combining the 2 of them
saying, this is fantastic. One of the quotes that's attributed to Henry Ford is, if people would have asked me what they need, they would have told me they need a faster horse, you know? And people at the time, they would have been right. A faster horse would have been helpful. But that's sort of as far as they could see. A faster horse, I could get more things done. Henry Ford, however, he saw something completely different. He was able to innovate the assembly line and change the course of transportation forever. But consider that Model T from about 100 years ago with what we have today, the smart car, or any 2012 model automobile. It doesn't need to be the smart car. Between the Model T and the smart car, I would argue there is no invention. There is actually very little innovation. What is happening here is 100 years worth of fantastic design improvements. The two things haven't really changed very much. There's 4 wheels, sort of made of rubber. You get in it, you steer it, you fuel it with something, probably still gasoline, but maybe electricity. You put something in it to make it go. The smart car has got more cup holders, no doubt, and a better sound system. Probably infinitely safer than the Model T. But there really isn't fundamentally much difference between the two of them, except in the design application. And again, this is where I really want to emphasize, we should actually be focusing more on design if we want to be adding value to our economy. Yes, invention, every now and then those things come along. Innovation, that can be really, really helpful, especially if you look at something like the Model T, but it's probably in the design application where the bulk of our prosperity and our wealth and improvements in living, that's where we can find them. One more example quickly. In the early Iron Age or Bronze Age, I don't know, I'm not a historian, but at some point they started fiddling around with metal, and they're able to get arrowheads and tools and different things like that. They were able to hone their skills, they were able to improve on them, some innovations happening here, or design improvements, to get medieval swords and knives and blades. And then we get to something like this. In the 1930s and 40s, the safety razor. Now this would have been an innovation, you know, arriving at something like that from the original blades, but going from that to what we have today. Now I don't know how many gentlemen use the Gillette Mach 3, and I'm not here to advertise for them, but let me tell you, it is fantastic. And it's a design improvement over that original safety blade. They didn't change, well, they didn't invent the blade, certainly didn't invent shaving. But what they did is they said, how can we improve on that safety, or on the razor blade, and create something that's not only safe, but provides a close, clean shave? And they did it. So it's a design improvement. Again, you see where a lot of the wealth has been added there. The Wampons de Lyon, he searched for the fountain of youth in mythology. We say, we've got enough youth, what we need is a fountain of smart. Actually, we need more youth too. We need a younger population in Canada. But really what we need is we need a smarter, more creative, more innovative population. That's really what drives it. Yes, young people are full of brimming with enthusiasm. They've got creative ideas. But I don't think we should stop at putting all of the heavy lifting on young people. I think every one of us has a capacity to bring a spirit of creativity with us. And it doesn't matter if you're a realtor, if you're a stay-at-home caregiver, if you work in a bank, if you're a politician, everyone has a capacity to tackle their tasks each day. How can I apply some creativity to this? I don't need to be Steve Jobs. I don't need to invent something brand new. I don't need to build a multi-billion-dollar company. But how can I apply creative thinking to what I need to get done today? And how can I bring that with me, either to my individual tasks or to my business, what it is I do as realtors, the tasks you do each day in dealing with clients and customers and with each other? How can we collaborate more? So that's really the impetus of the book, the theme of the book, throwing it down at the feet of Canadians to say, what is it we can do, rather than just looking to our governments to make us creative. You know, economists seem to be in a tither all the time about low productivity in Canada. And you know, there is maybe some reason for some concern there, but the knee-jerk reaction always seems to be, well, if there's a problem with productivity, the government needs to give us a tax credit. You know, if they want us to be creative, we need a tax credit. Now, there might be, you know, useful practical applications of the tax system to encourage some of this, but I like the analogy of a gym membership. You know, if the government of Canada feels we're all, you know, out of shape and we need to, there's a health risk here and we need to be in better shape, it could buy us all a gym membership, or it could maybe give us a tax subsidy of some sort or a tax credit for a gym membership. But you understand that doesn't solve the problem, right? You still need to go to the gym and do some sit-ups and do some treadmill, and you have to do the heavy lifting yourselves. The government can't solve the problem. It can maybe encourage us in a way, but we have to take the action. So the book is a bit of a call to action for Canadians. What do we want for our economy? What kind of attitudes do we want to be instilling in our children around creativity and innovation and entrepreneurialism? So I hope you have a chance to pick up the book. If you want to contact me in any way, my website there, toddhirsch.com, I do some blogging there and different things, and there's a way you can send me a note, hate mail if you want, or encouraging, whatever you want to, you can leave me a message. Or if you're interested, you can follow my tweets on Twitter. Thank you so much for your kind attention.